Okay, today we are going to talk about evidence, reasoning, and strategies, and how authors use evidence, reasoning, and strategies in order to make their rhetoric and their writing effective. So, when we talk about rhetorical analysis, once again, is the first task that you're going to be using in AP Language and Composition. It is taking someone else's writing and looking at it and deciding what's good about that writing. So I refer to it as dissection of writing. I've told you this before. It's the idea, like in dissection in biology, where you take someone's writing, you pull it apart into all of its like little tiny pieces, and then you look at each of those little tiny pieces and how they function, and then you think about how it works as a whole. So one of the things that does that when you're looking at those little tiny pieces is you want to think about the author's purpose in writing and how effective the strategies are in achieving that purpose. One question that I want you to think about every time you're given something to read in this class or watch in this class or read or watch anywhere else in the world is to think about how is the author or filmmaker or YouTuber or TikToker or whatever it is you're watching, how is that person attempting to manipulate me? And why are they attempting to manipulate me? Okay, so when you are doing rhetorical analysis, you need to consider the author's purpose first of all. Like we've talked about with Abigail Adams' letter to her son and Taylor Swift's letter to Apple and Malcolm X's letter to MLK, we know there can be multiple purposes. There can be the author's stated purpose, and then there can be like an underlying separate purpose in each of those things. So you want to think about both of those types of purposes. Then you want to start looking at what kind of evidence is the author using to convince me. You want to think about reasoning, and I'll explain to you that reasoning is the basic because behind the claim. So I make a claim, it's a statement of my belief, and then underneath that is my reason why I believe that. To support my reason, I often use evidence. And in order to convince you, I use stylistic and persuasive elements, which may not fit in an evidence category, but fits in somewhere else. All of this finds its roots in what you should have already learned as the Aristotelian appeals. An appeal to logos, an appeal to ethos, and an appeal to pathos. This little graph here is a really good reminder of what each of those appeals are. So appeals to logos is when an author uses logical evidence and reasoning in order to support what he or she wants. What I want you to take a look at down here is how to talk about it in your writing. So in our writing, when we talk about logical appeals, we don't say an author uses logos. That is incorrect usage. You say an author appeals to logos, and then you say how. So it's kind of like saying an author appeals to logos through one of these things. An author appeals to logos by presenting scientific facts, is one way that you can say that. Then there are appeals to ethos. Appeals to ethos is an author building his or her own credibility and trustworthiness. So Taylor Swift, for example, does this in Letter to Apple, right? When she says, thankfully, I am not like a starving musician. I earn enough to pay all of my people. So she's building her credibility to let you know that she's someone in the industry that can be trusted, right? So she's giving her background, right? And a way to develop or to build ethos. So when we talk about that, we say the author builds his ethos. We don't say an author uses ethos. An author builds ethos. And then last, there's appeals to pathos. Those are those things that get you like emotionally connected to the work. So you can look at emotionally loaded language, vivid descriptions, anecdotes, figurative language, repetition, all of those little stylistic elements that make us feel something. So When we talk about it in our writing, we say the author is appealing to pathos, right? So an author is appealing to pathos using emotionally loaded language or connotative language, if you want to use the correct term. Never uses ethos, pathos, and logos. It's always appeals to ethos, or appeals to logos, appeals to pathos, or builds ethos, and then through the technique. The analogy that I gave you last week was it would be like going into a restaurant and saying, if someone asks you what you want to eat and you say food, right? Okay. So what I want you to remember is that ethos, pathos, and logos, they are an umbrella category. Categories, not strategies of what you're looking for. Author appeals to pathos. The author builds her ethos. The author appeals to logos. So this is the umbrella category for appeals to pathos. Appeals to pathos are all those neat little language tricks. They're the things that English teachers love: metaphors, similes, repetitive devices, that anaphora, imagery, when we use personification. The word register, by the way, the one right here in quotation marks, refers to level of diction. So using formal language or informal language or things like that at different times. All of those things are considered appeals to pathos. So when an author appeals to pathos, an author appeals to pathos by using the repetitive device of anaphora. Okay, that's how we use that. The one that we're really focusing on today, though, are appeals to logos. And this is logical appeals, because I want to talk to you about the different types of evidence, because that's what I'm looking for you to insert into your email most of all: evidence that supports your idea. So if you look on this page, you'll see studies into statistics, scientific evidence, logical progression, anecdotal evidence, and things like that. The next slide, we're going to get into a little bit more specifically about what the different types of evidence are. This is directly tied into your homework assignment that you'll be doing, not the one that's due at midnight tonight, but the one that's due before the next time we meet as a class, which is I'm asking you to pick out the different types of evidence in a reading called Who Invented White People? So these are the different types of evidence. There is scientific, and sometimes scientific evidence can also be statistical evidence. The difference between scientific and statistical evidence is whether there's numbers involved. So scientific evidence is used whenever you reference any kind of scientific research or study that supports your idea. So I can say a study in Switzerland found that the coronavirus spreads less frequently among people when both individuals are wearing masks. Okay? I'm just referencing a study. But if I say a study in Switzerland found that 82% of the participants who wore masks and met within 1 foot of another person remained free of contracting the coronavirus, now I'm using statistical evidence. As soon as I've entered that number, then that scientific evidence becomes statistical evidence. Now, they're both scientific evidence is an umbrella category that includes statistical evidence. So if you refer to that as scientific evidence, it's not wrong, even if it uses numbers. That's why they're both on the same thing. But if you refer to something that just refers to a study as statistical evidence, that's wrong. Okay? All right, next one, historical evidence. So historical evidence we see Abigail Adams using in the letter to her son when she refers to Cicero, when she refers to Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. I know a lot of you thought of that as literary allusion because you were thinking of Julius Caesar, the play by Shakespeare that you probably read last year. However, she wasn't referring to Shakespeare. She was referring to the actual historical figures. So that's historical evidence of people who were heroes at the time or prior to the time of John Quincy Adams heading off to France. So she's provided historical evidence of people that she wants him to emulate and look up to. Okay, that's historical evidence. Anecdotal evidence can be an appeal to logos, or it can be an appeal to pathos, and it kind of depends how you write about it. An anecdote is when you tell a story. It can be your story, or it can be someone else's story. As long as it's not a historical story, if it's a personal story, then it's anecdotal evidence. So, when I go into sophomore English classes in the spring, sadly, I wasn't able to come into your sophomore English class because you were home. But normally I go in and I talk about, for those of you planning on taking AP Lang and Comp, this is why you made the right decision. So I'll bring forth some anecdotal evidence. And I have lots of anecdotal evidence from former students who say how easy college English is for them now, thanks to AP Lang and Comp, or how they were able to get out of college English because they took AP Lang and Comp and they passed the exam, or that they were writing a lab report in their science class at Yale, got this one just the other day, and he was able to use all of the things that he learned in AP Language and Composition to write that scientific report. And he felt so far ahead of some of the kids in his class who went to like really top high prep, college prep high schools, which made me feel really happy. But that's anecdotal evidence when someone uses a story of their own experience to support what they're doing, or someone else's experience. Okay, the next one on the list, Abigail Adams uses analogical evidence when she includes the metaphor about the traveler the traveler related to a stream, right? She's making an analogy. A comparison between two unlike things is called an analogy. It's also called a metaphor. In this case, she's using the evidence of the river to support that the more you go through life, the more likely you are to pick up qualities that will support you in your life. And the more experiences you have, just like a river picks up things along the way, right? Or grows bigger. So that's analogical evidence. Appeal to authority and testimonial evidence. This is when you bring in like someone who's an expert in the field and you say, this person believes what I believe and therefore I'm right. Because if I say something about climate change and I bring Al Gore into it, who's like studied climate change for like his entire life, I am using an appeal to authority. He is an authority on climate change. He's studied it. He knows it, etc. Testimonial evidence is just a little different than that. That's kind of like when someone gives a testimony that your side is correct, right? A lot of times authors do this in forewords of their books. They have different authors write the forewords, talking about the first time they read the book. And if you get someone who is really highly respected to give testimonial in your foreword, thumbs up to you, right? It's an appeal to logos and also an appeal to ethos, appeal to authority is. Then there are literary and biblical allusions and cultural and pop cultural allusions. So literary allusions are when you refer to any type of literature, Huck Finn, Moby Dick, Julius Caesar, all of those things, literary allusions. Biblical allusions, for people who don't have a very strong religious background, sometimes those are hard to pick out. But that's any reference to the Bible, biblical passages, or biblical stories. And then there's cultural and pop cultural allusions. Cultural allusions are when you refer to something that is accepted within the culture. So if I talk about things that we see on the 4th of July, I'm giving you a cultural allusion. However, if I'm talking about some meme that I saw, or something that I saw on TikTok, or something that the president tweeted on Twitter, believe it or not, Twitter is a pop cultural allusion. So what is popular culture today versus like a cultural thing that makes up your community? So those are the different types of evidence that make up an appeal to logos. This slide, which is linked on your daily class plans, this PowerPoint, it's the first link on there, is one that you're going to want to look at as you're doing the reading tonight for Who Invented White People, so you can identify some of those different types of evidence. Okay. Last thing is building ethos. And that's pretty simple. It's just trying to make yourself seem as respectable as possible as a writer. There's two different ways of doing that. There's presenting your personal qualifications, and there's showing that you are a balanced arguer and not biased. So if you show that you're using sources that are unbiased, then you are building your ethos and your respectability as a writer. Okay, a reminder for you that when you are doing rhetorical analysis, the three things, the big questions that you should always be asking yourself is, what is the author trying to convince me of? And that is the purpose. How is she doing that? And those are like the strategies and the evidence and the appeals and things like that. And why are those strategies, evidence, appeals, and things like that effective for the particular audience? Okay, that is the information that I want to share with you as like a little background for rhetorical analysis. Hopefully that gives you kind of a little bit of an understanding of what you're going to be doing tonight, but I'm going to be talking a little bit more about it now in class.